Let me just, this is my bio and pictures, and not to do a sales pitch, but what John pulled out was from the About page of my blog. And I want to just point out a couple of things to you on this pictorial to establish my credibility and just to give you some lessons learned so that you don't make the same mistakes I do. So for instance, this is my blog, Diva Marketing blog. I started it back in 2004, and I started it because somebody told me I could not talk about social media unless I was in the space to begin with. And I told him he was crazy. I could talk about anything I wanted to as long as I understood what was happening. And he said, no, you're wrong. You have to know how to do this before you can tell other people how to do this, before you can internalize it into an organization. And he was absolutely right. The lessons learned from that is, if you are outsourcing your social media, and we'll get into strategy and how this fits, but if you're outsourcing your social media, your Twitter account, your Facebook account, your blog account, be very careful if you're doing that, because you give up part of your branding, and you give up part of who owns that conversation, who owns the customer. It's okay to take a risk and color outside the lines in social media if you know what those risks and parameters are, and we'll discuss that in a bit. So recently I launched a book. It's an e-book on social media. It's the first book that's based on Twitter interviews. I went to mainstream publishers and I said, here's this very cool book, and the publisher said to me, it will never work. So I went back into the digital world, back into the social media world, launched the book, and within 8 weeks there now has been over 5,000 downloads. So what I'm trying to tell you is, take a look at what you're doing. Don't be afraid to color outside the lines, as long as you know when you're coloring outside the lines where you're going to step. And everything I learned about social media, I actually learned from my grandmother. When I was a little girl growing up in Boston, my grandmother used to take me shopping to the grocer, to the greengrocer, to the butcher, to the baker. And when she went into the butcher, if he had a chicken that wasn't up to her standards, she would tell him right there, I don't like this chicken, give me a new one. What would happen? Who would hear her? The community at large would hear her. Thanks. The community at large would hear her. And so she was involved with the greengrocer. The greengrocer, the butcher, the baker, was involved with her as well. They were part of the same community. And if he made good and gave her another chicken, the people in line would see that. And what would they do? They would probably tell their friends and neighbors. So what that greengrocer and butcher and baker were doing at that point in time, way back when, is they were creating brand loyalty. And that's what we're doing now online. We're doing the same thing that the butcher, the baker, and the candlestick maker did back in the day, but we're using digital channels to do that. So with any marketing or business function, you gotta have a plan. You have to have a strategy. This is my dog, Max. Max doesn't need a plan. Max is a YouTube rock star. He has over 13,000 views. It's not hard to get 13,000 views on YouTube if you're cute and if you're a dog. And I'm betting that you all could go into your organizations and find something fun and cute and put it up on YouTube and get many more. But that's not a strategy. And what do you do with that? What do you do with those views? What do you do with the people that are becoming your fans and your champions? That's what the branding will do for you. And that's what strategy will do for you. So what I want to do today in our time together is I want to give you a framework and have you participate. Let's mix this up a little bit, have some fun. This is what happens if you don't have a social media plan. All these components that we're talking about, all these tools, and I like to consider them assets, because if you consider social media tactics or tools assets, all of a sudden it puts it into a different perspective. It creates additional value. So the asset of Twitter, the asset of Facebook, and it creates a value of how you're going to handle it and how you're going to look at it on a long-term basis. So without a plan, they're just floating around in space. They're like Macs and YouTube. Nice to know, nice to have. Goodwill of Greater Washington wanted to play around with social media. And Brandon Hurley, the vice president, said to me, I really wanted to get into this space. I thought it was very cool and very sexy, but I didn't know how to do it. Until on one day, I had an aha moment. And that aha moment was, I figured out my problem. I was trying too hard to develop a social networking strategy instead of incorporating social networking into my marketing strategy. And that's what we find happens very frequently. Because these are shiny, new, sexy toys, people want to jump in and play with them, like Max and the YouTube. But we're missioned, no matter what business unit we're in, to move the brand forward, to move the organization forward, and you can't do that without putting some goals, tactics, objectives, all those marketing terms around it. So I said to Brandon a couple weeks ago when I was putting the deck together, I said, well, can you tell me, Brandon, what your goals were for this? Because I'd forgotten them. And so he tweeted them out. His goals are focused on sales, responsible stores as hip, inexpensive, vintage, and contemporary fashion options, and they wanted to reach a young crowd through social media. What they really wanted to do, they wanted to reposition Goodwill from a secondhand rose store to a vintage store and pull in a different demographic, while at the same time making sure that they didn't offend the base customers that they had. And so with that in mind, they could step into social media because they had a plan, they had an objective, and it met their business goals of furthering the mission of Goodwill, which is always at the heart of everything that they do. Oops. So this is what they did. They built an integrated plan, which included a blog, YouTube, an eBay store, MySpace, and Twitter. When they launched that, the story behind it is, they had a fashion show that they did on an annual basis, and they wanted to see if they could get more people into the fashion show. Well, there were only so many tickets that they could sell. So they took the fashion show, and they taped it, and they put it up on YouTube. And then they took all of the merchandise, and they put it up on eBay. So now they had 2 additional channels. And then they supported it with a blog, and at that time, MySpace was still pretty hot. They supported it with MySpace. Now they have a Facebook page, and they're on Twitter. They put together a content calendar. They wanted to post 5 days a week, and they wanted to make sure that they had different elements going out on their blog, and so they put this calendar together. Results. Within about 6 months, these were the results. Did it work for them? Oh, yes. Are they still doing it? Oh, yes. Are they having fun? They're having a blast. What they found that was interesting is that even though this was a digital media, they were getting more people to the stores. So they expanded their reach because now people could purchase on eBay. They could understand the mission of the organization. People were still coming into the store. And by the way, the added bonus that they didn't realize that they would pick up, they started getting media attention. Very cool. Cherry on the top of that sundae. So just for you, by the way, the deck is going to be available. It will be available on Diva Marketing, and I think that John and Rick might put it up on theirs as well, so we'll slide share it with you. So this just to set the level the playing field. We won't go into this, but Max does have fans. He's got fans in Canada. He's got fans all over the world. Wayne is from Canada, and the bottom one, I think she's in Britain, and then Paul Cheney, of course, is in Louisiana. So when you're talking about strategy, it can be a little bit boring sometimes. But the strategy that you put together is going to be different than the strategy that you put together, that the IRS puts together, that your company puts together. I call this a jelly bean strategy because even though it's the same, it's different. So with jelly beans, here we have candy, all different kinds of color. I'm passing this around. Have as many as you want and pass it around. So when you're building strategy, think about it this way. We're going to look at a couple of different models, but at the end of the day, your strategies are going to be different because your goals and objectives are going to be different. And the mission of your organization is going to be different. So the tools that we're going to look at today are the same, but the way you use them will be different. And that's what's really critical. I came across this a while ago. This is something that was in Harvard Business Review. It's a way to focus a strategy, and it's called a strategic principle. Unlike a mission statement, it's very action-oriented, and it sort of sets the pace. So, for instance, Dell, be direct. General Electric, be number 1 or number 2 in every industry in which we can compete. So I've talked a little bit about strategy, a little bit about me. Before we go any further, let's talk a little bit about you. How many people here are from academia? How many people here are from B2B? B2C? Healthcare? Oh, I see somebody hiding in the corner. Nonprofit. How many people are using social media in their organizations currently? Everybody. For people that are using social media in your organizations right now, how many have done any kind of an update within the past 24 hours? Not you necessarily, but your organizations. So you're pretty active. What do you want to get out of this session? Question? What do you want to get out of this session?
Our biggest goal is we don't have a social media policy, so it's basically that, trying to figure out exactly how do you create one, how do we, we don't need to handle our, all the employees, but basically just that, how do we don't mind the bad press, we want to know how do we tell them what to do, how do we control that, how do we, not control.
So you're looking at this from an internal employee point of view. Okay. We'll talk about that, yeah.
Same here. We've kind of been going in circles, creating, we've established a business case. I mean, we already have some social media in place with Facebook and Twitter, but now we're trying to further those efforts, and we've created a business case, and now we're going through a strategy, and just kind of finding out the best way to present it is tough. And that's kind of what I want to get out of this is how to navigate that correctly and effectively.
Okay. All right. The first step would be this. This is the first step. And if we had time, if this were a workshop, what I would ask you all to do is to take some time and think about what would go into your own strategic principle, because that will guide what you're doing. So homework for you when you go home. Lots of homework in this little session when you go home. Think about that. And in order to make that work, you have to understand the mission of your organization. So what would your strategic principle be? Here's an example of how it works. So Southwest's strategic principle is, let me read it to you, meet customers' short-haul travel needs at fares competitive with the cost of automobile travel. They were going into Denver, and they found that they couldn't sustain that principle, so they pulled out of that market. So that's how that would work. Jelly beans, same but different. Here are two financial institutions that are stepping or have stepped into social media. On our left-hand side, we see Wachovia. Wells Fargo. On the bottom of each of these, this is their mission statement. Take a look at the mission statement of Wachovia and take a look at their blog. It's reflective, it's very corporate, it's very buttoned down. Even the content is very corporate and very buttoned down. It's not to say that they're not writing in blog or social media language, but take a look at the graphics. Okay, now take a look at Idea Blob. Idea Blob was a community that was built by a company in Pennsylvania whose mission was to support small businesses, financial institution. Look how different. They built a community, Wachovia built a blog. Wachovia has several blogs. Wells Fargo. Different approach to social media based upon mission statement, company values, and so forth. The same, but different. So I want to present to you a way of thinking, a process that will answer some of your questions about internal employees. I like to look at this in three buckets, in three big pictures, and we'll go into that and then we'll delve into a couple of the elements. The first one is aligning the enterprise. Anybody here from New England? What's that? What are the Ducks? Do you recognize that?
Boston Common.
Yeah, they're from the Boston Garden. Anyway, aligning the enterprise. And then the second bucket is actually building the strategy. And then the third bucket is creating awareness. Keep in mind that every single time you launch a new social media initiative, they will not come unless you tell them. So with every single new social media initiative that you launch, you also have to create some sort of a marketing strategy, some sort of a promotional strategy. I'll show you a couple of examples. That can be tied to what you already have, but it has to go out, because not like in the olden days when people started blogging and it was so cool, anybody would come. People won't come unless you tell them. Okay, let's look at aligning the enterprise. What I have here is a list, and the list is bulleted out. Some of them are questions. So the very first element you do when you are building a social media strategy, and we're assuming that you're starting from ground one or coming in and taking a look at it, is determining the impact on the enterprise. Story on myself, I've been doing this for a bunch of years, and when I first started, I was firmly planted in the ground that social media really was a marketing function. And my friend Shell Israel said to me, no, it's not, Toby, you're wrong. It goes across silos. And I said, no, Shell, you're wrong. It needs to be housed someplace, and marketing needs to house it. Well, I've since eaten crow several times because Shell was right. It goes across the silos of an organization, and it touches places where we have not a clue where it will be touched, or the influence that we will feel. So obviously PR is a big deal. Customer service, we talked about that. AT&T did a great presentation. But it touches every single place that your customer is involved in. It touches accounting. It touches, where else does it touch?
Human resources.
HR, absolutely.
Legal.
Legal. So there has to be, when you first put this together, a way to face all of those different departments, business units, and align them. And I'll show you a way to do that. Communication is critical. Once it's aligned, once you decide that you're going to go on it, if customer service is using it and they find something, how does that information get back to R&D, if that's what's important? If we find a nugget, it really should go back to R&D. How are those communications channels set up? What that really does is it influences the enterprise at its very base level. Because now what we're looking at change within an organization structure. So it's not really the negative comments that people are afraid of. It's the change within the enterprise. And I think that management knows that intuitively. You can handle negative comments, and we had great examples earlier this morning on how some big brands were doing that. Cultural compatibility. How transparent are you? What does that mean to your organization to be authentic? How can you be authentic within an organization and at the same time represent yourself in the brand? That's something that most companies struggle with. Yes, you can create guidelines, but it goes deeper than that. Somebody said this morning it goes back into having everybody understand the brand value and the brand promise. And that's a great start. And so if you're pulling in an outside agency to help, they have to understand the brand value and the brand promise. Otherwise, you're not going to do you justice. Michael mentioned this morning that I was working with Chick-fil-A. Chick-fil-A did this right when we first started it. They brought in a cross-functional team, and we sat around a table and we looked at what I call the gorillas in the room. So this is the very first step. So you bring all the stakeholders that have anything to do with you or will have anything to do with social media in a room around a table. And you get out their fears, their concerns, and begin to address that. Because until those gorillas are addressed, you never know who's going to come back out and sabotage what you're doing. And bring in people in that room that you may not necessarily think are important. Put that in quotes. I was recently working with a credit union, and we interviewed, as part of our first step, 14 different lines of business, because we wanted to make sure that everybody was engaged, that everybody had a say in this. And then when we go and we build out the strategy, they'll already be bonded. 7 social media barriers that we find over and over again. Lack of internal resources. People are telling us we can't do that. How to scale. AT&T gave us some interesting ideas. Number 7 is interesting. Once social media steps in and people are identified to participate, all of a sudden the power of balance switches. It's no longer the manager in some situations that all of a sudden is present and people are coming to for information. It's the person in social media. That person all of a sudden has developed a persona and a public persona. And sometimes egos can get in the way. So think about that. I said this as a sort of a roll up the sleeves. I'd like you to help me fill in the rest of that list. So would you take 1.5 minutes? You're all in tables. Come up with one additional barrier that we can share with each other. That means you have to be social and talk to each other. And what we'll do is we'll take your ideas and we'll put it back in the deck and we'll post it. And if you give me your Twitter name, your Twitter handle, or the URL of your website, I'll make sure that it's tagged. All right, let's start with this table.
We said who owns it?
Who owns it? And Dorothé's going to take notes. Okay?
Probably part of Saturday.
That's good. Who owns it? Okay.
So, yeah, and they don't have to. Some dudes will. So.
Letting go of the power. Great. All right, ladies. Executive support.
That's actually exactly where I'm at.
Executive support 2 times.
Exclamation mark.
Exclamation mark. Okay. Lack of belief. Want to talk a little bit about that one? Lack of belief how?
Just basically you can tell them all day long, they shake their head yes all day long. They can say what you said back to them all day long, but they don't believe it enough to act.
Ah. Don't believe to act. Wonderful, Sherry.
Not that I've ever experienced that.
Nothing. Okay. This table, come up with anything?
We have two. Lack of confidence.
Lack of confidence. Oh, good one.
And we had, there's a fear in our office that there may be legal ramifications in higher education, FERPA, which is privacy, personal information issues, is a big concern.
Legal issues, privacy. Excellent. Okay, ladies.
Fear also in higher education. Lack of coordination.
Huge. Lack of coordination. And lack of training.
I think ours is legal, risk management.
Legal risk management, yeah.
Keeping people in different departments who aren't obligated to work with each other on the same message.
Oh, huge. Okay, how should we say that?
Consistency.
Consistency across department silos? Consistency across departments. Okay. Back table.
Identifying, deploying, and training and adopting the tool sets you need in order to get a real-time sense of what's being discussed.
Did you get all that one?
Almost. Identifying, deploying,
Identify, deploying,
And adopting
and adopting.
and
the
adopting.
tools you need to get an accurate pulse of
The tools you need to get an accurate pulse of
what's being said.
of what's being said. So that's monitoring.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's, yeah. Yes, sir.
I think another part of it is analysis paralysis, where there's so much, the challenge we have is it's almost like a mystery. There's so much information, so if I find out a little bit more, that doesn't necessarily bring me closer to a decision, but it may in fact make it more difficult to make a decision on how to deploy.
Yeah, information overload.
Yes.
Oh, yes. The tsunami of information that's coming in. How do you know what to look for? How do you know what not to look for? Oh, yes, huge. AT&T, I want to talk to you about how you're handling that. This table.
How to train the people in different departments on what to respond.
What to respond to. This is a great list. Okay.
Ours is similar to number 2, but basically, even if you have a strategy in place, getting the upper management to back that up.
Excellent. Having upper management buy-in. Okay, thanks. So now you have a list, a thought process to begin this. And so when you go back and do this with your own employees, you can help jumpstart the process. So this is the first of what I call tongue-in-cheek 5 steps to a peace conversation, and we just did one of the first. So you'd sit around the table, you would make sure, it's a brainstorming session is really what it is, and if you've ever done an ideology session, then these are the rules of the game. So you make sure that you have your own, you've done your own due diligence, you understand what's happening in the marketplace, you understand what's happening within your industry before you bring people in. There's an educational component to it. And then, as I talked about before, invite people around this table that have a stake. Make sure the C-suite is there to some extent. And then encourage people to talk openly. That might be the most difficult thing to do. And depending upon the culture of your organization, you might want to split it into a couple of different roundtables. Maybe it's a management roundtable, and maybe it's a staff roundtable, depending upon what happens. And then confirm, prioritize, engage in what I call a red step memo, and you'll see that in a sec. And this is really critical. Identify a social media champion. Ideally, there should be 2 social media champions, one at the C-level, because even though some companies begin this at a grassroots basis, it is not sustainable unless we have the sanction and the love from the C-suite. But the C-suite is not going to be on a day-to-day basis with this stuff, so there has to be somebody who is the champion on a day-to-day basis. That person may or may not be taking an active role in this, but it's the person who believes in it. As Sherry mentioned, somebody has to believe in this and will help pull it together, which will eventually lead to a way that you might structure this. So here's a red flag menu. You've seen this before a zillion times, I'm sure. Just an executive summary. What are the issues? What are the opportunities? What are the next steps? What are the action items? You've done that a million times, I know. So an example. And all this to say that social media right now is changing the business processes. It is much more complex than what we thought back in 2004, where there was just a blog. So now we have multiple ways for people to interact with our brand, with our organization, and with each other, which impacts that as well. Okay, so you're set up internally, you have guidelines internally, you've got this, you've got buy-in, go ahead, you've done this upfront work. Before you've even stepped into social media, all this work has been done, because now what you have is you have clear sailing. All the bumps in the road, or most of them, there'll be others as you come up, have been smoothed over, or at least identified. So now it's time to go back in and look at this from a perspective of the strategies that you've usually done, and I'm sure most people have done strategies before. So the model is very similar. Where it differentiates is that there are different things that you look for in social media. So for instance, the target audience. Who are they? You've already done that work before, I'm sure, but where are they online? You may not have looked at. What are they doing online, and what do they expect back from us? So as more and more organizations are stepping into social, our customers, our clients are expecting something from us. What are they expecting? Is it faster customer service turnaround? Is it information? Is it a relationship with the people behind the brand? Is it just having problems solved? Don't forget when you're building this out to take a close look at brand consistency, and as you're building it, has to be consistent across channels, because if it's not, if you're talking in one tonality on Twitter and another tonality on Facebook and your blog says something else, all the hard work that you've done to create your brand is going to slowly erode. And what will happen? Total confusion in the marketplace. So now we have to worry about the brand. Now you're ready to get down to tactics? How to listen to the digital conversation? And your point was absolutely spot on. How do you listen? Lots and lots of free tools. Lots of consultants coming up, lots of companies coming up. I think there's a new social media monitoring company jumping on the bandwagon literally every second. Isn't that right, Michael? I mean, we found hundreds of companies that are doing this stuff. Make sure that if you're going to work with them, you vet them and understand what they're doing, what their processes are, what their analysis back end is. What problem are you solving? Remember what Brandon said to us way back in the beginning. Social media is fun, I want you to do it, but it has to solve a business problem. What problem are we solving? And probably that will come right from your own marketing plan. You can take a look at that. It might come from the business plan. And then determining metrics for success. Okay. Social media, as you're developing your tactics, take into consideration that the further you go into this, the more that you step into the space, the more risk you take. So this might even be part of an upfront planning meeting as well. So for instance, a website, a community, a blog, you have more control over that. There's less risk. With a blog, you can filter comments, you can put your own guidelines up. On the more risk side really is Twitter. Not even necessarily your Facebook page, but anybody can say anything they want on Twitter, and you have no control. So understand where the risks are and how you can mitigate them. Questions, comments? And keep in mind that social media is all about the customer. It's not really about us. Sorry, marketers. It's not about the brand. It's not about the new products that we're going to launch tomorrow. It's about how we can add value to our customers' experiences. And that's different than anything else in marketing that we've been told, except when Mr. Kotler said, Marketing 101 is meeting the needs of your customers. How do you meet the needs of your customers? By giving them value. So really, when you think about it, social media is just marketing 101. Target audience. This is a tool that Forrester developed. And we talk about where people are, what they're doing. This might be one way that you can identify where your customers are and what they might want for you. Success, how do you build success? Again, that goes back to your goals and objectives. So again, like the jelly beans, different but the same. Yours on the IRS going to be different than probably the woman behind the pole in the hospital. Just some ideas to get you started. How do you measure this? Again, that will go back and you look at it in several different ways. One of the ways is the tool itself, what the tool can give you. These are quantitative methods that will give you some benchmark. So again, depending upon what your outcomes are, it could be email subscriptions, which has nothing to do with social media, but you may be driving people from a Twitter page back to a Facebook page where you want to capture their email address because you want to send them an email. Oh, by the way, in social media, think about it this way. Every single platform out there, except for a blog or a community that you owned, is not yours. You are only renters. How many times has Facebook changed its rules and regulations over the last 23 seconds? If you develop a huge customer base on Facebook, but Facebook changes its rules and regulations and your customers don't like it, or their rules and regulations are not aligned with your brand values, what happens to everything that you put into that asset? Think about it. A lot of these quantitative measures you'll find familiar because they really come from web analytics. So, as we say, you can measure so much on the web. However, there's stuff that you can't really measure, and that's where it's really hard to wrap our arms around. One of the big deals is all about the influencers. This is a model that was put together by David Ormano, gosh, probably about 3-4 years ago. And he actually crowdsourced this on his blog. He got ideas and he revised this several times. So the concept is that there may be one big influencer, and that influencer has power over a lot of other people, or not power, but opportunities to talk to a lot of other people. But there are many, many, many people that go out on the circle, say for number 4, so that you might consider that to be the long tail. And in social media, in the world of social media, there are ripples. You could even consider those networks. And the networks interact, and the networks combine, and the networks synergize. So this table may be considered one network. You may know that gentleman, so now all of a sudden you're connected. You may know that gentleman, so he may know her, and so forth and so forth. So the influencer factor, which is so elusive. This is really what interests me a lot. This is what I call the new value proposition. This is what we really are trying so hard to get our hands around. So what is the value? What is the perceived value of those influencers? What is the value of the community that the influencer brings to you, that network? What's the value of longevity? So if I write a blog post, it's up today, it's up tomorrow, it's up 10 years from now, as long as my server still stays. What's the value to you? What's the value to the brand? And then the last time, what's the value of real-time insights? Assuming you can get your arms around those real-time insights, but what's the value of it? How can you make sense of it? So these are the new value propositions. These are the propositions that it's hard to take back to our C-suites unless they understand and come along the journey with us. So all of a sudden going back to your CMO or to your CEO and saying, oh, we've got great value because we've got all these fans. Unless they're along the journey with you, understanding the value of those fans, it's not going to make any sense. So that's why that upfront round table, bringing in the C-suites really is critical. All right, third one, create awareness. As I said before, every single time you launch a social media initiative, you really need to create some sort of a marketing plan. So I like to look at marketing this way. Here's a customer at the top, here are the strategies, and then the enterprise is holding it together. So an integrated marketing model. Just some ideas. One of the reasons that that's so critical is you've probably seen this model before, the Forrester model, as a sales model, where the sales cycle comes up as a straight shoot, goes from awareness all the way to buy. And then here we have today's sales model, where we have so many ways of people to enter the sales cycle. Well, think about this sales model in terms of awareness, in terms of marketing, instead of purchase behavior. And think of it as every single channel that you're touching. So all those channels have to be consistent across the channels to ensure brand value is the same. Couple ways people are doing this. This is very interesting. On the left is a furniture store in Manhattan. Look at what they're promoting. Are they promoting their furniture? Look at the headline. Home Tweet Home. Become our Twitter follower and Facebook fan. That's the headline. The furniture's not the headline. The furniture's the backdrop. Brilliant. And then on the bottom, a biz card. And this happens to be Tony Shine's. By the way, if you haven't read his book, excellent. So the first one obviously took some bucks, took some care, took some time, probably was part of an integrated marketing strategy. Business card, you have business cards printed anyway. Another easy way to do this, your signature. So on your email signature, put a little tag, put URL, one way to do that. And let me just wrap this up by saying something from Dr. Seuss, because hey, you know, if you can't have fun in social media, why bother? And the line is, think left, think right, think low, think high, and the things you can think up if only you try. So again, think outside the box, keep those strategies aligned with your goals and objectives and your brand. And with that, I will turn this over to Dorothea.